My name is Sophia Reyes, and I am 35 years old. For most of my adult life, my profession, my identity, my entire world was defined by one simple, unassuming title: nanny. I was the woman who looked after my sister's children. I was a fixture, a piece of the furniture in her grand, sterile house, always present but rarely seen. My sister, Eleanor, used to introduce me at her lavish parties, if she introduced me at all, with a careless wave of her hand and the phrase, "Oh, this is my sister Sophia. She's an absolute saint with the children. She's the help." She'd say it with a laugh, as if it were a charming little joke between us, but it wasn't. It was the truth of my existence in her world. But I never imagined that a single piece of paper, the last will and testament of a dying man, would detonate the foundations of our family. I never thought that his final words from beyond the grave would strip them of their power and hand me the keys to their kingdom, forcing them to learn the true, brutal price of unconditional love. Before I dive into the story of how a quiet will reading in a stuffy lawyer's office ended with my sister screaming and me holding the future of her children in my hands, I'd love to know where all of you are watching from today. Let me know in the comments below. And if you've ever felt overlooked or underestimated by the very people who should have championed you, go ahead and hit that like button, so I know I'm not alone. For all the new viewers here, make sure you subscribe to join this incredible community of people who understand that sometimes the family you choose, or the family that chooses you, is the one that truly matters. Now, let's get into it. What would you do if you were handed a life you never asked for, but one you were uniquely prepared to live? My days began before the sun had a chance to bleed over the horizon, in a small one-bedroom apartment that was my sanctuary. It was modest, filled with second-hand books and plants I was constantly trying to coax back to life, but it was mine. The quiet hum of the radiator was a stark contrast to the world I entered every morning at 7 o'clock sharp. That world belonged to my older sister, Eleanor, and her husband, Richard. Their house wasn't a home, it was a statement. A sprawling contemporary mansion of glass, steel, and stark white walls. It felt less like a place for a family, and more like a gallery for modern art and unspoken anxieties. My job was to care for their two children, my nephew Leo, who was 12, and my niece, Maya, who was 9. They were the reason I tolerated everything else. They were the beating, beautiful heart in that cold, cavernous house. From the moment I walked in, I was governed by the schedule. It was a laminated document, Eleanor updated weekly, magnetically stuck to the stainless steel refrigerator. 7:15 a.m., wake the children. 7:30 a.m., breakfast, gluten-free, organic, no sugar. 8:15 a.m., school drop-off. And on it went, a minute-by-minute breakdown of my existence and theirs. My own needs, my own time, were secondary. I was a service provider, a cog in the machine of their perfect-looking life. The line between aunt and employee had been blurred so long ago it had vanished entirely, leaving behind only the stark reality of my position. I was paid, yes, but the emotional cost was far higher than my meager salary could ever cover. Eleanor and I had grown up in the same house, but we had lived in different worlds. She was the son, the golden child who could do no wrong. She was beautiful, charismatic, and effortlessly captured the attention and adoration of our parents. I was the moon, quieter, more observant, forever in her shadow. I remember her 10th birthday party. My parents had bought her a magnificent custom-made dollhouse, a perfect replica of our own home. I had saved my allowance for 2 months to buy her a small illustrated book of classic fairy tales. When I gave it to her, she barely glanced at it, tossing it onto a pile of other lesser gifts. "Oh, thank you, Sophie," she'd said, her eyes already back on the dollhouse. Later that evening, I saw our father pick up the book. He smiled, a rare, gentle smile. "She might not appreciate this now," he'd whispered to me, "but stories are more durable than houses, Sophia. Remember that." That man was Arthur, my father and Eleanor's, the patriarch of our family, and he was the only one who ever truly saw me. This dynamic didn't fade with time. It calcified. When Eleanor married Richard, a man whose ambition was matched only by his obsession with appearances, my role as the lesser sister was cemented. They built their empire, he in finance, she in being Mrs. Richard Sterling. And when Leo was born, I was the obvious, convenient solution. "It'll be perfect, Sophia," Eleanor had declared, not asked. "You can help me out, and it'll give you something to do." As if my own life, my own aspirations to be a writer, were just idle hobbies waiting to be replaced by a more practical purpose, serving hers. And for a decade I did. I put my dreams in a box, convincing myself that the love I had for Leo and Maya was a fair trade. I was their constant, their port in the storm of their parents' ambition and emotional distance. I was the one who kissed scraped knees, who checked for monsters under the bed, who read them stories until my voice was hoarse. Their parents provided the lifestyle. I provided the life. The indignities were a constant, a slow drip of disrespect that eroded my sense of self. I remember one summer evening, Eleanor was hosting one of her charity galas. She had insisted I come. "You have to be there, Sophie. It's for a good cause, and you can wear that blue dress I gave you." I had been excited, a rare chance to feel like a part of her glamorous world, to be an adult at a party, instead of the hired help. I spent hours getting ready, feeling a flutter of hope, but the moment I arrived, the illusion shattered. Eleanor, stunning in a sequined gown, greeted me with a frantic look. "Oh, thank God you're here. The caterer is short-staffed. Can you just help out with the champagne for a little while? You're so good at this sort of thing." And just like that, I was back in uniform, my blue dress feeling like a costume. I spent the next 4 hours navigating a sea of wealthy strangers, a tray of flutes in my hand, my sister's laughter echoing from across the lawn. Richard saw me, of course. He gave me a tight, sympathetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Haid, in down the fort, Sophia. Good girl." It was a pat on the head, a gesture one gives to a loyal dog. The humiliation was a hot coal in my stomach. No one there knew I was the host's sister. To them, I was exactly what Eleanor had defined me, as the help. I fled to the kitchen, my eyes burning with tears. I refused to let fall, and found myself face to face with the catering manager, a woman who looked at my dress and my tear-streaked face with pity. "Rough night, honey?" she asked, handing me a bottle of water. I just nodded, unable to speak. It wasn't just the public humiliations, it was the private cuts, the ones that went deepest. The family took a trip to a resort in the Maldives, a place that looked like a screensaver. I was brought along, naturally, to manage the children. But I was not on vacation. My days were a blur of sunscreen application, sandcastle construction, and enforcing nap times in a luxury bungalow, while Eleanor and Richard attended sunset cocktail parties and went on private scuba excursions. One afternoon, they were having a family portrait taken on the beach by a professional photographer. The light was golden, the ocean a perfect turquoise. Leo, then about 10, grabbed my hand. "Aunt Sophia, come be in the picture with us," he yelled, pulling me forward. Eleanor's smile tightened instantly. "Oh, sweetie, no, this is just for family," she said it gently, for the photographer's benefit, but the message was a steel blade. I wasn't family, I was a paid accessory. I retreated, the sand feeling like broken glass beneath my feet, and watched from the shadows of a palm tree, as they composed the perfect image of a family I was a part of, yet utterly excluded from. The photo, framed in silver, now sat on the marble mantelpiece in their living room, a daily reminder of my place. The financial aspect was another constant source of stress for me and amusement for her. Eleanor was chronically late with my pay. It wasn't malice, not exactly. It was a complete and utter disregard for the fact that I had my own bills, my own life, that required funds to function. I would have to bring it up, a conversation that always left me feeling small and grubby. "Oh my God, did I forget again?" she would say, her hand flying to her mouth, in a gesture of theatrical dismay. "Silly me." Richard handles all the money. You know how I am. I'll get him to do a transfer right away. It was always an act, a way of reinforcing the chasm between her world, where money was an abstract concept, and mine, where a late paycheck meant a stressful call to my landlord. She made me feel like I was being impolite by asking for the money I had rightfully earned. It was a power play, one of many, designed to keep me in my place. My own life, the one I tried to build in the margins of my time with them, was treated as a triviality. Once I was buzzing with excitement over a man I had been seeing. He was a musician, kind and funny, and he saw me as just Sophia, not the nanny. I made the mistake of mentioning to Eleanor that he was taking me to see a concert for my birthday. Her reaction was a masterclass in condescension. "Oh, that's sweet," she'd said, her eyes scanning a catalog for a new sofa. "It's nice that you have your little hobbies. Does he have a real job, though?" The question hung in the air, dripping with disdain. She couldn't conceive of a life, or a person whose value wasn't measured in financial success or social standing. She had belittled my joy, reduced a burgeoning relationship to a little hobby, and in that moment, I felt a familiar, weary resignation. My world would always be small and insignificant next to hers. But there was one person in the family who saw through the facade. Arthur, my father, their grandfather. He was the antithesis of his daughter. While Eleanor's home was cold and modern, Arthur's was a rambling, two-story brownstone on a tree-lined street, filled with the warmth of old wood, worn leather, and thousands of books. He was a retired history professor, a man whose wealth was old, quiet, and worn as comfortably as his favorite tweed jacket. He never approved of the way Eleanor treated me, but he was not a man for loud confrontations. His disapproval was a quiet, steady presence, a palpable disappointment that Eleanor chose to ignore. He would visit the children at Eleanor's house, but his visits were for me as much as for them. He would find me in the kitchen, preparing their snacks, and he would sit at the table and just talk to me, not as the nanny, but as Sophia. He asked about my writing. He was the only one who had ever read the short stories I wrote late at night, after the children were asleep. "You have a gift, my dear," he told me once, his eyes clear and serious. "You see the things other people miss. Don't ever let that go." He saw my worth when I was beginning to doubt it existed. I'll never forget one particular afternoon. Eleanor had been particularly cruel. She discovered a small grass stain on Maya's ridiculously expensive designer dress and had berated me for 10 minutes, her voice sharp and cutting, implying I was incompetent and careless. "Do you have any idea how much this cost, Sophia? It's probably more than your rent." The words, spoken in front of Maya, left me feeling flayed and raw. After she swept out, I retreated to the laundry room, my shoulders shaking, trying to scrub at the stain with a frantic energy born of shame. Arthur appeared in the doorway, a silent observer. He didn't say anything about Eleanor. He didn't need to. He just gently took the dress from my hands, set it aside, and led me to the back patio. He poured 2 glasses of iced tea, and we sat in silence for a long time, watching a bee bumble around the rose bushes. Finally he spoke, his voice a low rumble. "There's an old oak tree in the back of my garden," he said, staring off into the distance. "It's not the prettiest tree. It's gnarled, and one of its branches was struck by lightning years ago. But its roots run deeper than this house. It has weathered 100 storms, Sophia. People come and go. They admire the flashy, new blossoms on the other plants, but the oak endures. They don't see its strength because they're not looking for it. But the ground knows. The ground remembers." He looked at me then, his gaze piercing. "You're that oak tree, Sophia. Don't you ever forget it." In that moment, he wasn't just my father, he was my anchor. He gave me the strength to go back inside, to face my sister's world for another day, another week, another year. He made me believe that my quiet resilience was a form of strength, not a weakness. His home became my true refuge. On my days off, I would often take Leo and Maya there. The 3 of us, with Arthur formed our own little constellation. He would teach Leo the intricate strategies of chess on a worn ivory set, and he would show Maya how to identify the constellations through his old brass telescope. We'd bake cookies in his sun-drenched kitchen, filling the house with the smell of cinnamon and sugar, a scent of genuine domesticity that was absent from Eleanor's home. In those moments, in that house, we weren't a boss, an employee, and her charges. We were a family, a real one. The change was slow at first, almost imperceptible, like the turning of a season. Arthur, my resilient oak, began to stoop. His steps, once firm and steady, became a shuffle. The vibrant spark in his eyes dimmed, replaced by a weary, far-off look. The doctor's visits became more frequent, the words more somber. Heart condition, progressive, manageable, for a time. Eleanor and Richard responded with a flurry of performative concern. They hired a team of private nurses, the best money could buy. They visited Arthur, their visits brief, efficient, and filled with an anxious energy that had little to do with his actual well-being. I would overhear their hushed conversations in the hallway of his brownstone, their words sharp and urgent. "Is the trust updated?" Richard would murmur. "We need to make sure his affairs are in order, Ellie. He's not thinking clearly." Eleanor would shush him, her eyes darting around nervously, not out of respect for her father's peace, but for fear of being overheard by the staff. Their grief was already transactional. They were mourning the impending disruption to their finances, not the slow fading of the man in the bedroom. My role, once again, shifted. I was no longer just the nanny to his grandchildren. I became his caregiver too. It wasn't a job, it was a calling, a pull of the heart that I couldn't ignore. My days were split. I would finish my duties at Eleanor's, then drive across town to Arthur's house, often with Leo and Maya in tow. The nurses handled the medical necessities, the charts and the pills, but I handled the living. I would read to him from his favorite history books, my voice filling the quiet room with tales of ancient empires and forgotten kings. I learned to make his tea just the way he liked it, with a splash of milk and a single spoon of honey. The children would do their homework on the floor of his room, their youthful energy, a quiet counterpoint to the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Maya would show him her drawings, and Leo would talk to him about school, about the bullies and the triumphs that their own parents were too busy to hear. We were a vigil, a circle of love, around his fading light. Eleanor, of course, saw my devotion not as love, but as an angle. She couldn't comprehend an action that wasn't motivated by self-interest. "Really, Sophia," she said to me one afternoon, her tone laced with a familiar, weary condescension. She'd arrived for one of her fleeting 10-minute visits, dressed in designer athletic wear, her hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail. "The nurses are perfectly capable. You don't need to be here. You'll wear yourself out. Besides, it's a bit inappropriate, don't you think? It looks like you're trying to get in good with him." The accusation was so astoundingly cruel, so utterly disconnected from the reality of the situation, that I was left speechless. I was holding a bowl of soup I had just made for him, the steam warming my hands. I looked at her perfectly manicured nails, at the expensive watch on her wrist, and I felt a chasm open between us, wider and deeper than ever before. "He's my father, Eleanor," I finally managed to say, my voice low and tight. "He asked me to be here." She just sniffed, a delicate, dismissive sound. "Well, he's getting sentimental in his old age. Don't let him take advantage of your good nature." She didn't see love, she saw a transaction, a weakness to be exploited, and she projected her own transactional worldview onto me. It was easier for her to believe I was a manipulator than to accept the fact that I was capable of a genuine love that she herself was not. In his more lucid moments, Arthur's words became more precious, more potent. He knew his time was short, and he did not waste it. He would motion me closer, his hand, now thin and papery, gripping mine with surprising strength. "I've made arrangements, Sophia," he whispered one evening, his voice raspy. The room was dark, save for the soft glow of a single lamp. Arrangements to protect the children, to protect you. I shushed him gently, thinking he was rambling. Don't worry about me, Arthur. Just rest. But he shook his head, a small, determined movement on the pillow. You are the only one who has ever shown them what a home truly is, he insisted, his eyes locking onto mine. Not a house, Sophia, a home. There is a difference. Don't let anyone, especially not Eleanor, tell you otherwise. You are not the help. You are the heart. The words were a balm on a wound I didn't even realize was still open. I held them close, a private treasure, not yet understanding their full, world-altering weight. I thought it was just the sweet, final ramblings of a man I loved. The end came on a quiet Tuesday morning. The nurse called Eleanor, and Eleanor called me. Her voice was strained, theatrical. He's gone, Sophia. Daddy's gone. I drove to the house, my own grief a silent, heavy stone in my chest. When I arrived, the scene was one of controlled chaos. Richard was on his phone in the study, his voice low and urgent, already speaking to lawyers and accountants. Eleanor was in the living room, surrounded by a few of her high society friends who had rushed to her side, their expressions of sympathy as carefully curated as their outfits. They were performing grief. I walked past them, up the familiar stairs to Arthur's room. The door was ajar. Inside, Leo and Maya were sitting on the edge of their grandfather's bed, their small shoulders slumped. Maya was clutching the old, worn copy of fairy tales I had given Eleanor all those years ago, the one Arthur had kept in his bedside table. Leo was just staring at the empty space on the pillow, his young face a mask of confusion and sorrow. They hadn't gone to their mother. They had come here, to be with me. I sat down between them, wrapping an arm around each of them, and we sat in the quiet stillness of the room, the three of us, the true mourners, sharing a grief that was too deep and too real for the performance downstairs. The funeral was exactly what I had expected, a grand, ostentatious affair. It felt more like a society event than a final farewell. The church was overflowing with people Richard did business with, and women Eleanor played tennis with. The flowers were extravagant, the music perfectly chosen. It was a production, a testament to the Sterling family's status. Eleanor delivered a eulogy that was a masterpiece of empty platitudes. She spoke of her wonderful, brilliant father, in broad, generic strokes, stringing together clichés that felt like they'd been lifted from a greeting card. She never once mentioned his love of books, his terrible singing voice, his passion for history, or the way his eyes would light up when he talked about the stars. She was describing a stranger. When it was time for others to speak, the pastor looked towards the family pew. Leo was supposed to say a few words, something Eleanor had insisted upon, but he just shook his head, his face pale, and buried himself deeper into my side, his small hand gripping mine like a vice. He refused to participate in the lie. In that moment, his silent rebellion was a more honest tribute to Arthur than all of Eleanor's flowery, hollow words combined. I held his hand tighter, my heart aching for him, for Maya, for the man we had all lost, and for the family that had never really been one at all. The call came a week after the funeral. It was from a Mr. Peterson, a name I vaguely recognized as Arthur's longtime attorney. His voice was formal, yet kind. He was calling to inform me that I was required to be present for the reading of Arthur's last will and testament. I was bewildered. Me? Are you sure? Eleanor had already told me not to expect anything. Daddy probably left you a small token, a sentimental something, she had said, waving her hand dismissively. Richard will let you know. The idea that my presence was formally required felt strange, almost like a mistake. Eleanor was predictably annoyed when I told her. Oh, for heaven's sake, she sighed over the phone. That's so dramatic of Daddy. It's just a formality, Sophia. You'll be in and out. Just try not to look too out of place. Her words, meant to put me in my place, had the opposite effect. A tiny, defiant spark flickered within me. I would be there. The lawyer's office was a cliché of old money and solemnity. The walls were lined with dark mahogany bookshelves, filled with leather-bound legal tomes. The air was heavy, with the scent of wood polish and old paper. I sat on a stiff leather chair, feeling utterly and completely out of place, just as Eleanor had predicted. She and Richard were there, of course, seated on a plush sofa, looking impatient and entitled. A few other distant cousins, whom I barely recognized, were scattered around the room, their faces etched with greedy anticipation. Eleanor gave me a tight, condescending smile. From across the room, a silent reminder that I was merely a spectator at this, the main event of her life. I felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. I just wanted it to be over. Mr. Peterson, a man who looked as old and dignified as the office itself, entered the room and took his seat behind a massive, polished desk. He cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense silence. He began not with figures and clauses, but with a letter Arthur had written, to be read as a preamble. "Here's my family," he read, his voice steady. "I leave you with this thought. A legacy is not measured in dollars and cents, but in the love you give and the character you build. Wealth is a tool, nothing more. It can be used to build or to destroy. It can insulate you from the world, or it can be a bridge to connect with it. I hope I have taught you which path to choose." I saw Eleanor shift uncomfortably on the sofa. Richard's expression was unreadable, a mask of polite indifference. The lawyer then proceeded with the minor bequests. The cousins were given small, specific heirlooms and modest sums of money. They accepted them with polite, yet visibly disappointed, nods. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. Mr. Peterson adjusted his spectacles. "To my daughter, Eleanor Sterling, and her husband, Richard Sterling," he began, and I saw Eleanor sit up straighter, her chin lifting in anticipation. "I leave a trust fund in the amount of $500,000 each." The silence in the room was no longer just tense. It was electric. $1 million, to most people, would be a fortune. To Eleanor and Richard, who had been expecting a figure with at least one more zero, it was an insult, a pittance. I saw Richard's jaw clench almost imperceptibly. Eleanor's perfectly made-up face went slack with shock, her mouth opening slightly. Her eyes, wide with disbelief, darted from the lawyer to her husband. "That's all?" she whispered, the sound a raw nerve in the quiet room. Mr. Peterson ignored her, his gaze fixed on the document before him. He cleared his throat again, a deliberate, momentous sound. "And now," he said, his voice dropping slightly, "for the residuary of my estate, which comprises all remaining assets, accounts, investments, and properties, including the primary family residence at 142 Chestnut Lane, with a current estimated value in excess of $20 million. He paused, and every eye in the room was on him. Eleanor was leaning forward, her breath held, a flicker of hope or confusion in her eyes. Perhaps this was it. Perhaps this was the real inheritance. Mr. Peterson looked up from the will, his gaze moving past Eleanor, past Richard, and settling directly on me. For the first time, I felt like the only other person in the room. His eyes were kind, but weighted with the gravity of what he was about to say. "I leave the entire residuary of my estate," he declared, his voice ringing with clarity and finality, "to Sophia Reyes." Time stopped. The air in the room seemed to solidify, to become thick and unbreathable. I heard a sound, a sharp intake of breath that might have been my own. The words echoed in my head, nonsensical, a language I didn't understand. "To Sophia Reyes." It had to be a mistake, a cruel, elaborate joke. I looked at Eleanor. Her face had drained of all color, leaving behind a ghastly, pale mask. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, were fixed on me, filled with a dawning horror. Richard looked like he had been physically struck. His mouth was hanging open, his face a comical picture of disbelief and panic. "What?" The word was a croak from Eleanor's throat, a strangled, incredulous sound. "What did you just say?" That's not possible. That's a mistake. Mr. Peterson held up a hand, silencing her. There is no mistake, Mrs. Sterling. Your father was very clear. He then turned a page, and his voice became even more deliberate as he read the final, devastating clause. This inheritance, in its entirety, is given with one specific and non-negotiable condition. It is my most fervent and final wish that Sophia Reyes petition for and be granted full legal guardianship of my grandchildren, Leo Sterling and Maya Sterling, and that she raise them in my home at 142 Chestnut Lane. He wasn't finished. He continued reading Arthur's own words, each one a perfectly aimed arrow. I have had the privilege of observing my family for many years. In that time, I have seen that while my grandchildren have been provided for in every material way, they have been starved of the one thing a child needs most. It has become clear to me that Sophia Reyes is the only person in their lives who has consistently and selflessly provided them with true, unconditional love, a stable and nurturing presence, and the moral guidance they will need to become good and compassionate human beings. She is not their mother by blood, but she has been their mother in all the ways that truly matter. The room erupted. Or rather, Eleanor erupted. She shot to her feet, her chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. Her face was no longer pale. It was a blotchy, furious red. "Gordian," she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. "Gordian, she's the nanny. She's the help. This is insane. My father was senile. He was delusional. He wasn't in his right mind." Her accusations flew, wild and desperate. She turned on me, her eyes blazing with a hatred so pure, so venomous. It was terrifying. "This was you. You did this. You manipulated a sick old man. You poisoned him against me, his own daughter. I will not have my children raised by a conniving, gold-digging servant in my own father's house." Richard, his face ashen, grabbed her arm. "Ellie, stop it. Not here." His mind wasn't on the perceived betrayal. It was on the legalities, the public relations nightmare that was unfolding before his eyes. The cousins were staring, their expressions a mixture of shock and undisguised glee at the drama. And me, I was frozen, utterly and completely paralyzed. The world had tilted on its axis. The screaming, the accusations, the lawyer's calm voice, it all sounded like it was coming from a great distance. $20 million, the house, guardian. The words were just sounds, empty of meaning. My sister's rage was a physical force, a wave of heat and fury, but I felt strangely detached from it, as if I were watching a scene from a movie. All I could hear was Arthur's voice, a quiet whisper in the storm of my mind. "You are not the help. You are the heart." It wasn't a victory. It wasn't a triumph. It was a terrifying, monumental, and sacred responsibility that had just been placed squarely on my shoulders. And in the wreckage of my sister's world, I felt a strange, terrifying calm begin to settle. The life I had known was over. A new one I had never imagined or asked for, had just begun. Eleanor's final, venomous threat hung in the air as she and Richard stormed out of the office. "We will see you in court, Sophia. You will never get a single penny of his money, and you will never, ever get my children." The door slammed behind them, its echo sealing the chasm that had just ripped open in our family. The distant cousins, their purpose served, scurried out like mice, whispering excitedly amongst themselves. Suddenly, I was alone in the cavernous office with Mr. Peterson. The silence was a heavy blanket. He looked at me over the top of his glasses, his expression one of profound weariness and deep sympathy. He had seen this coming. He had known Arthur, and he had known Eleanor. "He knew this would be difficult, Sophia," the lawyer said gently, enfolding his hands on the polished desk. "Arthur was a very perceptive man. He loved his daughter, but he was not blind to her nature." He reached into a drawer and pulled out 2 items, a heavy, old-fashioned brass key ring, and a thick, cream-colored envelope sealed with wax. He pushed them across the desk towards me. "These are for you. The keys are to the house. It's yours now, free and clear. And this is a personal letter from Arthur. He asked that you read it when you were alone. My hand trembled as I reached out and took them. The keys were heavy, real. The letter felt sacred. What do I do now? I whispered, my voice barely audible. They're going to fight me. I can't fight them. You won't be fighting alone, Mr. Peterson said, his voice firm. Arthur made provisions. He was nothing if not thorough. He established a separate, substantial trust, managed by my firm, for the sole purpose of handling any and all legal challenges related to the execution of his will. He anticipated your sister's reaction perfectly. He knew she would see this as a battle for money and pride, and he armed you for it. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Her legal position, I must tell you, is exceptionally weak. Arthur underwent multiple psychological evaluations in his final year to establish his lucidity, all documented. Furthermore, he spent the last 2 years compiling testimonials, journals, notes from nurses, even recordings of conversations that paint a very clear picture of the family dynamic. A picture of neglect on their part, and of profound care on yours. If this goes to court, Eleanor and Richard stand to lose far more than just this inheritance. They stand to lose their reputation, which, as you know, is the only thing they truly value. I left his office in a daze, the keys cold and heavy in my pocket, the letter clutched in my hand. I couldn't go back to Eleanor's house. I couldn't go back to my tiny apartment. I walked for what felt like hours, ending up in a small, quiet park. I sat on a bench under a large, shady tree, with trembling fingers, broke the wax seal on Arthur's letter. His familiar, spidery handwriting filled the page. My dearest Sophia, it began. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are likely feeling frightened and overwhelmed. I am sorry to have placed such a heavy burden upon your shoulders. Please, forgive an old man's final, desperate act to protect the people he loves most. I have watched you for 10 years, Sophia. I have watched you give my grandchildren the love and attention their own parents could not be bothered to provide. I have seen you soothe their fears, celebrate their triumphs, and nurture their spirits with a quiet, powerful grace. You did not do it for money or for praise. You did it because it is who you are. You are a person of deep and abiding love. That is your gift, and it is the greatest inheritance my grandchildren could ever receive. I am not asking you to take my daughter's children from her. I am asking you to give my grandchildren a home. The house on Chestnut Lane is yours, with no strings attached. It is my gift to you for a decade of service and love that was never properly acknowledged. But the guardianship of Leo and Maya, that is not a command. It is a request, from the very bottom of my soul. They need you, Sophia. They need your heart to guide them. Do not be afraid of Eleanor's anger. It is the roar of a person who has just been forced to look in a mirror for the very first time. I have given you the tools to withstand the storm. The choice, and the future, is yours. Whatever you decide, know that you had the unwavering love and respect of an old man who saw you for the magnificent oak you are. Be strong, be brave, be you. Yours, Arthur. Tears streamed down my face, dripping onto the crisp paper. They were not tears of sorrow, but of a profound, earth-shattering validation. He saw me. He had always seen me. Later that afternoon, I drove to 142 Chestnut Lane. I stood on the sidewalk for a long time, just looking at the handsome brownstone. It looked the same, yet everything was different. I walked up the stone steps, my heart pounding, and slid one of the heavy brass keys into the lock. It turned smoothly. The door swung open into the familiar foyer, filled with the scent of old books, lemon polish, and a faint, lingering trace of Arthur's pipe tobacco. The silence inside was absolute. I walked through the rooms, my footsteps echoing on the polished hardwood floors. I ran my hand over the back of his favorite worn leather armchair in the study. Heaven amain. I paused in front of the mantelpiece, looking at the photos displayed there. Not the glossy, professional shots from Eleanor's house, but candid snaps. Leo with a chocolate-smudged face. Maya asleep on the sofa, clutching a book, a picture of the three of us in the garden, covered in dirt and laughing. This was a house that held memories, that held love. This was a home. The weight of it all, the wealth, the responsibility, the impending battle, it all crashed down on me. For a moment, I felt a wave of panic. How could I possibly do this? Then, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Leo. "Are you okay? Mom is going crazy." My own fear dissolved, replaced by a fierce protective instinct. I knew what I had to do. I drove to Eleanor's house. The atmosphere inside was toxic, a thick soup of rage and despair. Eleanor was locked in her bedroom, but I could hear her shouting at Richard. I found Leo and Maya in the garden, looking small and lost. I sat with them on the grass. I didn't know how to begin, so I just started. "Your grandpa, Arthur, he wanted to make sure you were always safe and loved," I said softly. "He left me his house, and he asked if you would want to come and live there, with me." Leo, always so perceptive, looked at me, his eyes wide. "So we would live with you, at Grandpa's house?" There was no fear in his voice, only a quiet, hesitant hope. Maya, who had been silently braiding blades of grass, looked up at me, her little face serious. "If we live with you," she asked, her voice small, "will you still read to me every night?" Her simple, perfect question cut through all the legal jargon, all the anger, all the millions of dollars. It was the only question that mattered. I pulled her into a hug, Leo pressing in close beside us. "Yes, sweetie," I whispered into her hair, my voice thick with emotion. Every single night. In that moment, holding them, I knew. Arthur's request wasn't a burden. It was a gift, the greatest gift of all. I called Mr. Peterson the next morning. "I accept," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I'll do it. I'll do whatever it takes." The legal machine, so expertly prepared by Arthur, roared to life. Mr. Peterson sent a formal letter to Eleanor and Richard's lawyers, outlining Arthur's provisions, the documented proof of his mental competence, the extensive journals detailing their emotional neglect, and the existence of the separate, formidable trust for legal fees. He also pointed out the clause in the will they had missed in their fury. If they contested the guardianship and lost, a likely outcome, their own million-dollar trusts, would be immediately dissolved and redirected to a charity for abandoned children. It was Arthur's final, brilliant checkmate. There were a few weeks of furious, blustering threats from their lawyers, but it was all posture. They knew they were beaten. Faced with the choice between a messy public court battle they would almost certainly lose, one that would expose their dirty laundry to their entire social circle, and a quiet, humiliating retreat, they chose to retreat. They conceded. A formal agreement was drawn up, granting me legal guardianship of Leo and Maya. The day we moved into the brownstone was quiet and surreal. There were no moving vans, just my beat-up sedan packed with a few boxes from my apartment and the children's most treasured belongings. We walked through the front door, not as visitors, but as residents. It felt strange, like we were playing house. That first night, we ordered pizza and ate it sitting on the floor of the grand living room, our voices echoing in the high-ceilinged space. There was an undercurrent of sadness, a shared sense of loss for Arthur, but there was something else too, a fragile, tentative shoot of hope. Later, as I tucked Maya into her new bed, she held my hand. "Grandpa would like this," she whispered. "Us being here." I knew she was right. The months that followed were a blur of adjustment and learning. I was no longer just a nanny. I was a guardian, a homeowner, the manager of a significant estate. I spent hours with accountants and financial advisors, men in crisp suits who initially looked at me with skepticism, but soon came to respect my quiet diligence and common-sense questions. I was learning a new language, the language of portfolios and trusts and property taxes. I was also learning the language of boundaries. Eleanor's calls were, at first, demanding and accusatory. I learned to let them go to voicemail. I established a new protocol. Visits were to be scheduled in advance, and they would happen here, in my house, on my terms. One Saturday, she came for her first scheduled visit. She walked into the home she had grown up in, as if she were a stranger, her eyes scanning everything, looking for flaws. The children were in the garden with me, our hands covered in dirt as we planted a new vegetable patch, something Arthur had always wanted to do. "You have them playing in the mud?" she said, her voice dripping with disapproval. "Their clothes will be ruined." Leo looked up from the tomato plant he was carefully placing in the soil. "It's okay, Mom," he said, his tone matter of fact. "Aunt Sophia says clothes can be washed, but memories can't." Eleanor was silenced. She saw her children, happy and grounded in a way they never were in her sterile, perfect mansion, and the look on her face was a complex cocktail of resentment, confusion, and something that looked almost like pain. She didn't stay long. The easy, authentic joy of our new life was a language she didn't speak, a rebuke to her entire way of life. It's been 2 years now. The house on Chestnut Lane is no longer quiet. It's filled with the sounds of Leo practicing his guitar, Maya's laughter, the bubbling of pots on the stove. It's filled with life. My relationship with Eleanor is distant but civil. I think, in a way, losing her children forced her to finally see them, and to see herself. The change is slow, and I don't know if she will ever truly understand the damage her neglect caused. But she is trying, in her own clumsy way. The inheritance, the millions of dollars, faded into the background very quickly. It's a responsibility, a tool that allows me to give Leo and Maya the security and opportunities they deserve. But it is not the prize. The prize is this. The prize is watching Leo stand up to a bully at school, because, as he told me later, it's what Grandpa Arthur would have done. The prize is finding a short story Maya wrote. A story about a brave aunt who saved 2 children from a lonely castle. Looking back, I realized that Arthur's greatest gift wasn't the house or the money. It was his faith in me. He saw a strength in me that I never saw in myself. He took my quiet, overlooked love and declared it to be the most valuable asset in his entire world. He didn't just change my life, he revealed it to me. I wasn't the help, I was the heart, and I had been all along. My story is a testament to the fact that the quietest love can sometimes make the loudest impact, and that family is truly defined by love and respect, not just by blood. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have accepted the inheritance and the immense responsibility that came with it? I would be fascinated to read your thoughts in the comments below. Please, share your own story if you've ever had a moment where your true worth was finally seen, especially by someone you didn't expect. Don't forget to like this video if my journey resonated with you, and please subscribe to the channel for more stories about overcoming life's greatest challenges. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. I hope it inspires you to recognize the quiet strengths in yourself and in others. And I wish you all the strength and love in the world.